Hey, it's Chris, your favorite video. It's that time of year. Gift giving, gift receiving, gift buying. So what are we talking about? All the games you should not buy at retail. Take two, because I just spent 25 minutes talking to a camera without the record button being pressed. You ready to go? I got my preamble on, I got my intro done, and I got the games sitting next to me that you shouldn't have in your collection at the end of this month. Do what I say, not what I do. First up, we're talking about it right here. Tales to Amaze. I gotta be careful because nowadays inserts are more meant to look pretty rather than actually keep things if you want to store your games upright. This is no exception to that. I traded for a copy of this. I took my own advice, right? I gave up two things that I was no longer going to play or be interested in, potentially, and got this as the Kickstarter version instead. So it comes with the little extra promo whatevers and the little extra like any creature minion tokens, whatever. Right? The problem, though, is I look at this and I go, this is Unmatched, right? My 9-year-old is a huge fan of the Star Wars Epic Duels, although I can't tell nowadays if it's more nostalgia because we played it and got rid of it, and if he actually really enjoyed it that much. I think so, but maybe not at the same time. And so this is my foray back into that for him, but now he's more interested in, he found out there's Marvel of it, and so I have Hell's Kitchen, I've got Legends Season 2, whatever, blah, 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 and I've got this. And I'm going, is this going to be the one? He actually wants to play competitively, which is strange. But maybe that's Dice Throne, and we've been playing more Dice Throne rubbing off. But this is the cooperative. And I said, okay, I like co-op. This is a game I would like to play with my wife. Because we just played 2 other co-ops tonight, and it worked relatively smoothly, even though she literally said to me, I wanted to punch you as I was explaining the rules to them, as it was, you know, glazing her over. That was per my brother-in-law's words, not mine. And so I look at this and I go, can this redeem my feeling of it? Because I got rid of Star Wars Epic Duels for a reason, folks. One, it was vastly overpriced and overvalued. And then 2, I just felt a little bit bland in the gameplay. It was a little bit too bleh. So I liked it for the aesthetic, you know, being able to play some of those characters is freaking sweet. But that's also what I'm hoping out of this. And that's why I've looked very heavily at Cobble and Fog, and I've looked heavily at Houdini and Genie. And I'm looking at the upcoming Samurai one that's coming out in Q1 of 2024. But like, those are the cool aspects. My kid is like, ooh, Marvel. Can we get some more Marvel, Dad? I'm like, no, we have Marvel Dice Throne, we have Marvel United, we have Marvel Legendary. You know, we're going to have Marvel Zombicide soon. I'm just like, I don't need that. But if it gets him to the table played and we can mix and match, I can choose one and he can get his Marvel kicks. Right? But the key point here is that if you want something, you're going to actually, most of the time, have to give something up that's actually halfway decent. That's what people forget nowadays. They're like, hey, I'll give you my 3 copies of Catan and my 1 Munchkin for your copy of the Kickstarter for Sleeping Gods Distant Skies. No. No. Like, you can't just cheapen people. I put up a price on a game that I was selling this weekend, a game that's not yet at retail, a game that's very sought after, a game that my review was out and it wasn't super overly endearing positive, but people really love it anyway. You know, it rhymes with Venti Brong, and someone was like, hey, I'll pay you, you know, $20 less than what you're selling it for. I'm like, no. And they're like, oh, they were like all offended. Like, oh, I can't believe you refused my offer of lowballing you. Like, man, seriously? No. Like, I know it's sometimes worth a shot, but there's also a way to do it. Like, anyway, side ramble there. That's number 1. And, you know, it's sort of going along with the dueling of Senjutsu here. And the deluxe edition and side ramble here a second as a whole. Like, I hate sleeves. I hate this sleeve. This is going to tear. It's so hard to get on and off. I can't even, you know, slide it off even here for the camera, right? I'm paying extra money for that. That's what we're paying extra money for now, folks. Guarantee losing money on that side of things. I don't know why people think that's such a cool thing. I just don't get it whatsoever. But that's Tales to Amaze. Next up, again, another one that you shouldn't end up with in your collection, but I got it because it's a review copy, but I have to be very careful again because insert designed to hold things pretty, not to actually store them safely at all angles. This is Tamashii Chronicles of Sen from Awaken Realms Light. And Awaken Realms Light, there is the emphasis. This is a lighter game. Nope, just kidding. Just kidding. It's an oxymoron. This is by far and away the heaviest game from Awaken Realms Light out there. I'll also make the argument this might be better than anything not named Nemesis, objectively speaking. Subjectively speaking, it might even be slightly better, but no one's going to give it a chance because the graphic scheme and the cyberpunk and the deck, well, not deck, bag building aspects of it. Because also, you know, review coming out shortly before or after this video, it does not take the foot off the pedal with this one. And what I mean by that is the fact that it's just almost too much of a good thing. They've got so many different elements in it. They got so many different tokens, so many different cards, so many different unlocks, so many different upgrades that it's just overwhelming, too much of a good thing. And you know, that's the problem with some of their other ones, right? Such a sprawling, encompassing, imaginative direction, but sometimes less is more, and this also screams to that. And that's going to be one of my biggest criticisms as a whole, is that just a little less of this, a little bit narrowing, a little bit streamlined, a little bit more making an English rulebook that you can play straight out of. That's such a barrier to entry. I had to learn how to play this by watching somebody else's video. That is one of the biggest pet peeves, grind my gears sort of thing in this hobby, right? And it seems like every single one of their games, that's the route that you almost have had to take or have someone else teach it to you. And that's, you know, not pleasant. And I hate complaining about that, but, you know, it shouldn't be an issue. Anybody should be able to pick up the rule book and fully learn and explain the game based off of the rulebook alone. And too many can't. I just opened up another game today and they're like, hey, don't want to read the rulebook? Well, don't worry. We've already got a how to play video made for you. And I understand that. But at the same time, it was almost like, well, we kind of did the how to play video because we don't really care as much about our rulebook. Seems to be the MO. Now, this is a good game. I just don't know if it's going to stay in my collection because it's also a heavier campaign pseudo scenario driven game. And part of me, you know, halfway through this just wanted to unlock everything and say, screw it. Here you go. Just have all the cool stuff. I hate also having all the cool stuff locked behind and having to play 16 sessions, right? It's one thing if it's Zombie Kids Evolution or Zombie Teens Evolution, right? Where we're playing like a game in like 10 minutes and you get to unlock and you can play 2 or 3 in a row and you get like a cool envelope to open. Like when the sessions are like 60 to 90 minutes and you may or may not get 1 or 2 pieces of cardboard that you may or may not use in the next round or may not come up in a round or two in terms of like actual scenarios, not actually rounds. Like, man, it's like Zombicide. You leave all the cool unlocks at the very end to get powered up, but you can't ever get that far because the game slogs out and times out in the end. So, yeah, I mean, that's Tamashii. You don't need it. And also, you know, it's going to cost you triple digits easy. And you might be one of those ones watching this and saying, Chris, I don't have a problem with triple digits, Chris. I can spend triple digits. I don't really care. That doesn't bother me. I don't buy games to sell games, right? A fool and his money are soon parted, right? There's a reason that phrase is still around today. It's because you don't buy stuff on a whim that you go, well, maybe I'll like this. Well, and that's too much of our hobby in the first place, which is why I started making this monthly video in the first place. Because there's too much of that. There's too much of that. It's one thing if you're like, okay, Chris, I'm reviewing, I've got a bunch of this stuff. I am also the game group organizer, holder of the gauntlets and the grails, and I teach everything. And yeah, that's one thing. That's the exception rather than the rule. So otherwise, again, it's a ton of money for a question mark. Next up, Pandasaurus, Fox Experiment. Crowdfunding, I think it got the Dice Tower seal of something when its review came out recently. It's showing up to retail. I remember this campaign. I was not overly impressed with this campaign. The gameplay didn't have as much on the page as I wanted, and the exclusives were basically a 5th and 6th player expansion. Which, if you're like me nowadays, you go, well, you know, I'm lucky if I get 3. 4 is, you know, an aberration. 5 or 6 is a waste of time and money and space in the first place. And I'm seeing more campaigns do that nowadays, like recently, or just even more publishers do that recently, like Cascadia with Landmarks. No. Of the things people wanted out of Cascadia, I don't think anyone with reasonable taste. Just kidding. I'm just being sarcastic. I get a little too tongue-in-cheek in these videos, sometimes get myself in trouble. But what I'm saying is, of the things that people wanted for Cascadia, for example, I would make the argument that if you asked them to list those things out, nowhere on the top 3 or 4 would be a 5th and 6th player expansion. And so I looked at this the same way. I go, some of these games recently, I just played another game, 2 games tonight. I looked at this and I said, I don't think I'd ever want to play this with 4 people. It's a good game, but 4 people with this? Whoo, slog, slow down, time. And I look at this the same way. I think this is going to be an interesting set collection resource management style of game. I thought the meeples on the campaign were kind of poor, to be frank with you. If they weren't actually screen printed, you couldn't even tell if they were floxes because they were like blobbish. I think they improved them post-campaign a little bit, but I've also just not been terribly impressed with a lot of screen-printed meeples. I'd rather just have a plain cutout meeple nowadays, too, of foxes. I think of Keep the Heroes Out down there, and, you know, just sometimes less is more, just like we were talking about with Tamashii there. And I don't know, mixed opinions on this. They say the AI system at the lower player counts is a little bit of a time hog, too. I don't know with this one. Pandasaurus is going mostly deluxe rather than gameplay. And like I said, you basically had to pay for the 5th or 6th player to make the value worth it on the crowdfunding campaign, which that's no question for me why I'm skipping it. So, you know, just like a couple of the others from Pandasaurus and AEG, I think you're better off trading for them. I think you're better off trading for them, or again, waiting for someone else to make the mistake instead of you and getting it off cheaper for them. So reviews are middling 7s right now overall, so we'll see where it goes from that aspect. Next up, we're going to go a completely different route. We're going to go with probably one of the few games on this list that I will say will end up in my collection for sure if it isn't already, right? Like, again, do what I say, not what I do. Kiri, the Duel game. A combination of Mugen Gaming as well as Lucky Duck. It just released. It was sort of a slight Essen release, and now it's coming. It was supposed to be November, now it's mid-December. Basically, this is paper, scissors, rock, slash, essentially. You lay 2 cards down, face to face, face down, you flip them over, initiative order, you strike high, you strike low. First 1 to 2 hits on your opponent wins. It's that simple, it's that straightforward. It reminds me, actually, very similarly of Pocket Paragons here, only this is more of a paper, scissors, rock, lizard, Spock. And because there were a couple of different options extra in terms of that, rather than just paper, scissors, rock, it became just almost a little too chaotic, although the time to play and the overhead a lot easier than, say, the thing it's sitting on in Exceed, Battlecon, Yomi, etc. It also was a lot more random, and you felt like you're a lot less in control. And so I think this, with narrowing down the options, is going to give you more control in that sense. Is it going to be, you know, something that you're going to love, though? If this is one of your pet peeves, if this isn't a type of game you're going to like, this isn't going to change your mind either. But at least this is a somewhat more palatable $23 shipped or so, maybe a little less, depending on the site you get it from, pre-ordered or not. So that's the sort of thing you need to just be aware of. Are you willing to spend that money on a question mark? And still, the answer should be no. The answer should be no. But I'm a sucker for this type of game. This is one of my favorite types. And so, especially at a lower time frame that Exceed and Battlecon don't always give me, yeah, okay. Again, do what I say, not what I do. So, completely other end of the spectrum, as well as the metaphorical weight, we are going to go to Scholars of the South Tigris, the latest from Garfield, which is just coming out as well. It's got almost a weight of 4 on Board Game Geek right now. I'll make the argument, south, north, east, or west of the whatever ones. I know there's not one of those out yet, but I'm not remembering which one. And off the top of my head, it's just easier and more fun to irritate people in the comment section by saying that one of these inevitably almost ends up being preferred. Inventors is the upcoming one, Wayfarers was the previous one. And for me, as a person on the edge of those games, I have such a hard time now telling which one is going to be the one that clicks well, which one is going to be the preferred one over the others, because that's inevitably what I see with a lot of the Garfields, where people are just like, I prefer this one overall. You know what happens when you prefer one overall? Guess what? The other one doesn't get played. The other one doesn't get played. It's just taking up space. If you're not actually playing it, and there's such a similar overlap that, you know, you're not going to play the other one because it's completely different, well, that's an issue. Then did you really need both in the first place? And then you may end up getting rid of one as well. Not that that's a bad thing, but it sort of reminds me of the cooperative games. I was just playing CMYK's latest Daybreak, and I said, okay, how is this different than your Pandemics, your Spirit Islands, your other ilks? And it fits nicely in a different vibe, in a different weight, in a different overhead, in a different experience than those other ones, because that's what I was concerned about. Is it going to be too much overlapping Venn diagram? And thankfully it wasn't. But that's my concern with a lot of the Garfields, because they have a type, because backers seem to have a type of them. They have, you know, similar ones from other companies as well. How much overlap? Which one are you going to prefer to play over? And I can't really tell. And there wasn't a reason besides their little usual promo pack and, you know, gold coins to get it on crowdfunding. So, you know, they even say go and support us at retail too. That's cool. It's kosher, man. We're awesome with it. But again, I trade for it. And if you're patient, you can usually get a good deal, and you can have somebody else, you know, do the heavy lifting, and you just getting rid of something from your collection in order to take its place. It's what I did with Wayfarers. It's how I found out that Wayfarers is a good game, but it's not definitely for me. And I'm okay with that. But do you really want to find that out? You know, paying $70 a premium on crowdfunding with your extra coins and your extra promos just to be wrong? That doesn't sound like very fun. And even retail for $40 doesn't sound like very much fun. Now let's go back to one of the other more recently announced ones. I just talked about this when I talked about the news video at the beginning of the month with GameFound's Feast and their upcoming announcements for the looking at 2024's upcoming whatevers, right? And this was Last Light. Last Light getting a reprint and also getting another expansion, a second expansion. And the grind my gears on that one was on the little advertisement on, you know, GameFound Feast. They're like, upgraded rule book or whatever it was. I forget the adjective, if that was the exact one or if it was slightly different. But I said, man, this is a second edition. This is a second edition striking on the iron is hot when the other is like literally going to be out at retail for like 1 to 3 months at most. And you're already upgrading the rulebook. You know, it seems like a lot of times nowadays, again, grind my gears, right? Old man shouting clouds. Companies are just like, well, if our rulebook isn't good enough, who cares? We got really pretty aesthetic. You know, I'm looking at Senjutsu next to me. You know, even CMYK's Daybreak that I just mentioned, rulebook was okay-ish. Awaken Realms rulebooks, we already talked about that one. Like, if you want this game to succeed, mass market retail, right? You need to be able to have something that is user-friendly, folks. I'm not talking about me user-friendly or you user-friendly, but if you want mass market success, that is a huge barrier to entry. You think if Wingspan's rulebook was so ambiguously poorly written, like some of these have been, that it would be as good as it is at retail? No. Because inevitably you have a large fan base that's going to pick it up and they're going to continue to buy it, and they can have continued to buy it with all the expansion success because they were able to learn how to play it in the first place. And there's nothing more frustrating than having that happen. Now, back to Last Light. I mean, it's a premium 4X. Yeah, it's marketed 60-minute 4X, right? So I guess the question you have to ask yourself is, if you pay an extra premium, perhaps even 100% extra, to be able to have something that potentially can hit to the table even easier than its counterparts in the 4X genre, is that worth it for you? Is it worth it for you? Because time is often more of the issue. Accessibility is often more of the issue. I don't think also that if you're not a big 4X fan, is this going to be the one that changes your mind? Because 4X is still 4X. Is it going to be worth it? Now there's some deluxeified, some exclusives. And so, you know, at the retail right now, you know, you're probably better off waiting for that GameFound campaign, because chances are it's going to be less than retail. Or if you're really dead set on this one and you've played someone else's copy already and you know you love it, then maybe you wait and get it on GameFound. You say screw it because you don't actually need any game anytime soon, because you've got enough backlog to last you until 2025 at this point regardless. And so when you get this in 2025, you'll have saved yourself a little bit of money, and so you shouldn't buy it at retail from that aspect of things. So yeah, take that for what you will. So going back to the dueling, and we'll talk about this one as well, Dice Throne's Santa versus Krampus, where it just finally made its way to broad distributors. It just got refilled on the stock. I think Roxley, Dice Throne, I forget how the split was. I think Marvel is just the OP and Dice Throne, and then like Roxley is still all the other. I could be wrong. But the issue with this one was, you know, this one was not out at retail for a long time. And this was the grail one for a lot of the collectors who never got it on the campaign. And the big benefit from the Roxley pre-order is you get some of the promos, or you get the little deluxifications or not. And so at retail now, you don't have to worry about all that. You can get it separately. And from that aspect of things, you know, awesome. Santa seems to be one of the lesser well thought of ones, just maybe fun, but not actually competitive and, you know, winnable with. Again, just reading off forums and, you know, tier rankings and that sort of things that I've looked into. And Krampus seems to be a lot more competitive, but also a lot more complex, and like a 4 or 5 out of the complexity in terms of, you know, their little scale of 1 to 6 based on the die. And the other thing that I've seen routinely when I've looked at those lists is when you ask people, which ones should I get? If you're just going into Dice Throne, or which ones should be next, or which ones are really, and people say a lot of this stuff, just like Marvel Champions, right? Like, buy the one that's most appealing to you, buy the one that looks like the most fun to you, buy the one that you like the most, whatever. I do not see this one being recommended. Like, okay, here's one of the boxes from season 1. Okay, here's one of the ones from season 2. Here's one of the Marvel ones because you have an attachment to the IP. Like, I don't see this one being advertised or recommended at all. If anything, by most of the people that are completionists, it's one of the last ones they end up getting. Very few people, unless you're like Santa's brother's cousin's uncle's son, or you have a family member who owes Krampus, you know, a little side debt, you're not really looking at getting this one anytime, you know, soon in the collection. So this is more for completionists rather than for people necessarily to wade into Dice Throne in the first place. So from that aspect, if you don't have most of the other ones, I'd say most of the other ones seem to be really unique as well, and you may like them a lot better because these seem to be a little bit more fringe in the first place. I don't say that as a bad thing, I just say that as a matter of fact. Their mechanics are significantly more different. And some people are going to like that, and some people are just, especially even if you're a Dice Throne junkie, you're not going to like that necessarily at all, and that's okay. Because all of these are different, but it's also slightly more expensive for just 2 of them in the first place. So, yeah, food for thought. So where else are we going to tickle fancies? Well, we're going to go another head-to-head 2-player duel in a completely different asymmetric deck style, abstract-ish, Reykjavik-centered. Yeah, I pronounced that right. Looked how to pronounce it up before the video. Capital of Iceland, where you got Boris, chess grandmaster, versus your Bobby Fischer. And you're playing over a meta series of several games like they play with the chess tournaments where they play like best of whatever. Only you only get a few turns for each of these games, essentially, until you have to make the best of it in this 2-player tug of war. Well, we've seen a lot of that recently, you know. Kelp, just on crowdfunding. I have another game from 25th Century Games called The Hunt. This is from Deep Print Games. You know, Time to Kill, sitting over here on my shelf behind the loop. You know, there's a lot of that going around. And the tricky part with these is even myself, right? I just talked about in my best of November, I really liked Boop. My wife preferred Garden Guests. And that's the problem with these 2-player-ish asymmetric games, even if they're symmetric, that sometimes what you think is going to work and what actually works is not there. And this has a chess theme, right? You're getting meta in this game. And is that going to tickle your fancy? Do you care about chess? Not that you need to care about chess with this one, but if you have someone who's interested, yeah, it's going to make the appeal better. But if you don't, is it going to be a breaker for you? Probably not, but it's one of those where your mileage is going to completely vary in this sense, and you're not going to have a clue whether or not this is going to hit home, be a little too meta, or just not your type of tug of war in the first place. And that's a little bit of the weird, scary thing. Speaking of weird tug of wars, we're going over to John DeClare's from the latest Brotherwise game, hitting crowdfunding and then retail. This is Empire's End. Empire's End is sort of a reverse engine builder where you start off with this nice, pretty, clean, built civilization, and basically you're just trying to slowly avert disasters via an auction mechanic. It's sort of hit or miss. People seem to like the reverse style, but it's also, as a couple review comments state, not really hitting the pleasure center of the brain, if you will, with the auctions, right? You hit the auction, you go, aha, I won. Instead, it's like, aha, I just narrowly avoided this major disaster, but I'm going to pay for it in the next round because I can't avoid it now. Because essentially, when you do get disasters, you get rewarded for your disasters in addition. And I think it's kind of okay, but the crowdfunding reason was really the deluxifications. There really wasn't any significant gameplay content. Blessing Curse with Brotherwise here. Again, this is a, you know, try before you buy. The John DeClare in these lines of card-driven, Dead Reckoning, and the other Tableau Edge of Darkness style Mystic Veil games are very divisive. People either love them or just kind of think they're meh. And are you willing to go out there on a limb and say that? Now, again, with these next couple, or these last few on this list, there's not a ton of review comments. There's not a ton of review numbers on Board Game Geek. I mean, this has 400. The next one we're going to talk up has even less than that. So, you know, I don't really take stock in a rating of 7 point whatever or 8 point whatever when you've got less than like 1,000. It just doesn't hold as much water. Now, again, that's sort of subjective anyway, because I don't really hold much of those numbers in high regard, high esteem whatsoever in the first place. But that's why you could like this one more than the 7.2 rating suggests on Board Game Geek, or you could easily pass on it because this style of things is different. Different also is great innovatively, but different also means there's a higher chance it's going to miss for you because you haven't played anything else like it, so you don't have anything to compare it to prior to going in. And if that's the case, you're better off playing someone else's copy in the first place. So yeah, and sorry, mix that up. Match of the Century was the previous one that we just talked about. That only has 128 ratings. So not that this next one has many more than that at the time of me filming this, but that's Arborea. Arborea only has 350 right now. And so Arborea was recently out last year on crowdfunding from Alley Cat. And the vibe here was, you know, screaming, and even like, I think Rado's quote was like, this is better than Batoku, or this is the next Batoku, or something along those lines. I don't know. I haven't played it. I've played Batoku. Batoku's actually relatively engaging, and it's not nearly as heavy as it seems in a nutshell. And so when I heard that, I was like, okay, Alley Cat Games, and you've got sort of these woodland spirits with the very nice aesthetic, shared worker placement Euro, where you've got like the lines, I think, that are going across the tracks, and the further over they get when they're activated, the better the rewards are. And there was some comments and a little kerfuffle between the designer and some commenters and the, you know, Board Game Geek forums. It's basically going back and forth about saying, well, this game isn't good because of this thing. And then they were like, well, you actually played it wrong, and this is actually there for a reason. And mea culpa, maybe? I don't know. But this is heavier. Again, it's closer to the 4 than the 3 weight on Board Game Geek. And if it's going to cost you 2 hours of your life, is that worth it for you? I think it's doing something different. I think it's doing something slightly innovative with the shared resources, building your little ecosystem and terrain. But is it really, again, just like Empire's End, the commonality between these two is if it's doing something significantly different, it's high risk, high reward. And crowdfunding versus now. And the other reason you may not be looking fully at the retail side of things is because when I pull up the Kickstarter page to look at this and say, was there not or exclusives? And there were, you know, Winds of Change cards, upgraded wooden meeples. You got an expansion as well included, but it doesn't say the expansion is exclusive. And so you had about 8 more Winds of Change cards total in addition to the deluxeifications, the little insert, and, you know, the extra wooden stuff. It's not really, it's like a promo set, essentially. So you're not missing out from that aspect. But if you find that you like it, you know, that's the problem with buying at retail too. We'll flip the coin on its head right now, right? Is if you find you really like it, then are you going to sell your retail version, lose money on that, then only to buy a Kickstarter version? And if it's really decently well thought of, you may be paying above what the Kickstarter pricing was in the first place, which again, not too bad, but again, another reason to trade for it or play someone else's copy first so that you don't end up with the wrong edition of the copy in the first place in your collection. So there you go. Now, we're going to go on to Feister. Feister's latest. This was a lot lighter. It's still staying in Maracaibo, but now we're going with Pirates. Pirates of Maracaibo. Because you're standalone in the same 2019 area. But now, if you are familiar with the original, you can jump right in. It says independent, more accessible, as evidenced by the weight of less than 3 with this one, as opposed to much higher than 3 on the previous. There's not a great description on Board Game Geek. It lists multi-use cards, dice rolling, and allying with other ships as you basically sail around. Now, it's interesting because what I just said does not always correlate to what's being listed on some of the comments on Board Game Geek in the description. At the time of me filming this, you got people saying that it actually plays a lot heavier than a 2.8. Now, it takes maybe like half the time of the regular Maracaibo, so that might be a win. But, you know, are you going to want a different version of Maracaibo with a different theme? Lots of similar iconography, lots of setup. So it doesn't get away from that. And if you're having a lot more of that, potentially, right? If I'm taking a long time to set up, I want the payoff to be significantly more. I just do. I really cannot stand games that take me, you know, 20 to 30 minutes to set up, and I'm playing it for like 60 minutes, right? Like that time frame is just not worth it, folks. It's not. That's why I hate doing reviews sometimes on the channel, and why I do them together, is because you don't realize this, but setting up and tearing down a game literally doubles the length of time spent on the review video portion alone. And I don't want to do that on my channel. It's hard enough to do that on a regular game night with people who aren't familiar as the teacher. So how much of time and space and energy do you have from that side of things? So food for thought. There you go. Those are the hot and the not hot in your collection retail listings of December right now. As always, stay away unless all of those things are completely missing the mark and you feel confident otherwise. Or, as I said several times throughout the video, trade for it. Trade for it. Give something up. Something goes out, something goes in, right? Better way to do it. You don't need to buy retail. You don't. You don't. Don't. Do you, though? Stay classy. See you around. Thanks for watching.